So now we're going to talk about the 7 habits of happy people. Before I do that, let's have a look and see if any of you have questions here. We have no hands raised, and no one has put in questions in the chat box yet. So feel free to do that as we go along. So I will actually open up the next PowerPoint here. And we'll talk about, let me actually show you, I'm just going to show you the website here. I'm sure you've visited our website. If you go to the Science of Happiness, Introduction to the Science of Happiness, and we have a page on positive psychology and the science of happiness. We talk about the 7 habits of happy people. So how do we come upon the number 7? Well, quite frankly, it sounds good. Because you could say there are 8 habits. You could say there are 9 habits. And we have thousands and thousands of studies, of scientific studies, being produced now. There's been a huge increase from 1990 until now. It's almost exponential, which is great, because now by taking a look at these studies, what we're trying to do in our organization is to group together these studies into particular areas and try to find agreements between them, as well as translating them into English. Because as you know, scientists are not, some of them are not the best communicators in the world. And some of my fellow philosophers are not the best of communicators in the world. And in fact, some philosophers seem to enjoy making things more difficult to understand. And if you read the Tao of Pooh, which is one of your textbooks, the famous quote, which I have on my door at university is, "I think, therefore I am confused." It's my favorite quote. And it doesn't take much explanation. So our whole mission, one of our basic missions, is to collect the studies that have been done, to conduct reviews of these studies or meta-analyses of these studies, and then to translate the results into understandable English, and to bridge the gap between theory and practice. What can we learn from these studies? And how can we apply them to real life? And it's very exciting when you look at them and you see these areas of agreement. So we're going to begin today with, we're going to go through the 7 habits very briefly. You'll be going through them in more detail during the course. We'll be beginning with relationships and caring. Alison will be talking about positive mindset, having a positive mindset. The emotions of gratitude. She's going to talk about mindfulness, which is not really an emotion, and she's going to talk about hope and optimism. So she's going to talk about positive emotions as well as this phenomenon, which is becoming a huge object of interest in the scientific world, called mindfulness. So if there's no, we have one question here. Just before I start, could you sum up Seligman's theories and practices as he uses the acronym PERMA? I find that it complements the correlates in this course and touches on each concept expounded by the other pioneers mentioned so far. Great question. In fact, maybe we can do that during the question and answer at the end of the course. I am actually, personally, I prefer Seligman's original work, Authentic Happiness, and we can have a discussion about that later, although PERMA is closely related not only to his original work, in fact it's more closely related to his original work than maybe he would admit, if I could sort of poke fun at him for a moment, but it's also closely related to the 7 habits. And at this point, actually, in answer to your question, or not really an answer, but you've raised a very interesting point here. You know, what is the difference between positive psychology and the science of happiness? And just want to clarify for everybody that you know, our website and our organization deals with the science of happiness. And positive psychology is almost like a subset within that bigger area, the science of happiness. We believe that there are areas of human life, human behavior, and human thinking that are not covered by positive psychology, but are very important to our happiness. And of course, one area is the physiological components, such as exercise, you know, sunlight, and possibly diet. So that's the difference between positive psychology and the science of happiness. And our 7 habits will cover, of course, you know, both areas. So thank you for your question. Maybe we can talk about PERMA towards the end. So the first habit, let's go to the PowerPoint, is let's go to our slide here. There we go. Human relationships. There's a huge amount of evidence that people who have one or more close friendships are happier. On top of that, it's the quantity. It doesn't matter how many friends you have, according to most of these studies. What matters is the depth of those friendships. So just to take one example, they did a big survey of high school students, and they found out that even the high school students who had 100 friends on Facebook, or you know, that they hung out with, were actually, many of them were actually more unhappy than your average student. And many students who only seem to have one friend seem to be very happy. And they looked into this and to try to find out what was going on. And one conclusion, and it's a tentative conclusion, but it seems to be picking up strength, is the idea of personal disclosure, self-disclosure, the idea that in a relationship, a very happy relationship, we slowly reveal more and more of ourselves. And the other factor is cooperation. If we sort of work together in activities that we you know, share an interest in, so it's very useful to, you know, that's why book clubs or organizations where people share the same interests are very useful for building friendships. And to connect this with the philosophy, the very opening passage in the Confucian Analects, Confucius says that talks about the fact that it's wonderful to meet a friend from afar. And why is it wonderful? Well, there are the great commentators on the sayings of Confucius. Some of them say that the reason is because we're not just talking about an ordinary, you know, we're just not talking about anyone who jumps on a plane and hangs out at your place because, you know, it's cheaper than staying in a hotel, who shares a common interest with you. And Confucius felt that particularly the search for truth, that two people who shared this sort of common desire to live the good life could build deep friendships. And Aristotle also talks about the meaning of true friendship. And Aristotle actually talked about friendship more than nearly any other philosopher in the past or in recent years. And he felt that true friendship was not based on, couldn't blossom with simply, you know, I'll scratch my back if you scratch, I'll scratch your back if you scratch my back. He felt that friendship wouldn't blossom based on that simply reciprocal sort of arrangement. He felt that, you know, there has to be, at some point, you're sort of spontaneously so fond of the person that you're seeking their own good, and that's irrelevant of your own interests. And he felt that that kind of friendship united pleasure with virtue, because of course that was the essence of virtue, being compassionate and being caring. So the bottom line is, one friend can do the trick, and I have a little tip here. Listening is maybe a key to building successful relationships, and successive disclosure is very important. The ability to really sort of be able to open up and not hold back too much. Caring is the second correlate, and I think after this, we'll hopefully Alison can chime in. But just very briefly, there's a lot of evidence that acts of kindness can have an enormous impact on our happiness. I myself have personal experience with this. Not that I practice acts of kindness all the time. In fact, I've been told when I was in East Asia that I was fairly oblivious of the interests of and needs of others, and East Asians are particularly sensitive to that. So, but I of course I try to based on the research. This is an area that I'm very interested in. I sort of try to improve based on these results. But there's two kinds of caring. Very simply, there's systematic caring or organized caring, volunteering, and there's a lot of scientific research that shows that people who've two things: people who've been involved in successive waves of volunteering, they might go once a year and do something, and people who are motivated, self-motivated. So there's an intrinsic motivation for the volunteering activity, because they found out that groups like high school students who are sort of required to volunteer or encouraged to volunteer don't get much benefit out of volunteering, possibly because they and in fact the funny thing is, they when they asked high school students what were their motives, most of them would say, well, I was looking actually for a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or it's good for my CV when I go to university, it looks pretty good. And not so many of them volunteered simply for the sake of it. So and they found that there seemed to be a correlation between the motive and the impact, and that intrinsic as opposed to extrinsic motives were very effective. So if you do any of the practical assignments in this course, don't do them because you have to. It actually I actually actively discourage you from trying out anything if you're simply trying it out as a sort of academic experiment. Do it because you feel like doing it. If not, it's better simply to do maybe a sort of written assignment. So anyway, that's volunteering. But of course, simply thinking about the people around us, caring for the people around us, is also very, very effective in raising people's level of happiness. And a very simple experiment you can conduct is think about the 3 happiest people you know. Just try to imagine them. Who are the 3 happiest people you know? And among those 3, are they the comparatively people who tend to think about others more? And I would sort of guess that there's a great likelihood that at least 2 out of 3 would be those kind of people, or maybe all 3. So that's an interesting experiment you can think about, which is very easy to conduct. And now we want to talk about the philosophy of caring, just very simply. And we don't have too much time. I think Alison has to leave early today, so let's just very briefly talk about the philosopher who spoke more about caring than anyone else, which was Buddha. And Buddha's actually a philosopher, and for those of you who don't know, he was agnostic. And it's so strange how Buddhism turned into a religion, but really it didn't begin as a religion. It began as a philosophy. And there's a famous quote here, which is actually from the Dalai Lama. The greatest degree of inner tranquility comes from the cultivation of love and compassion. The more we care about others, the greater is our own sense of well-being. And that's very much connected with the Buddhist idea of compassion, which is one of the famous eightfold paths. And it's the main virtue, it's the biggest virtue of the Bodhisattva. So what's the bottom line? Well, there's volunteering, but also there's what we call, performing acts of kindness for the people around us. And both are effective. And if we don't have time to volunteer, very simple things that we could do, like even, for example, my wife loves gardening, so sometimes the best thing I can do is to join her as she gardens and take care of her flowers, which she really treats like her grandchildren. And the final thing is that if many studies show that participation is critical. So in other words, if you do go volunteering, or if you do kind things for people, try not to get into a situation where they simply feel that you're taking pity on them, but where they feel that they've somehow participated in the act of caring. So, for example, I went on a volunteer mission after Hurricane Katrina, and one of the houses that we fixed, the owner of the house was this little old lady, and she would actually go out and buy the tools for us to use because we were useless about finding the right tools. And so that went really, really well because she was participating. We were using the tools and she was showing us which tools we should use and blah, blah, blah. So that's another important discovery from social science. So now, if Alison, if you're ready, maybe we could talk about positive mindset.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to give you the screen. Or can you? Yeah, you can do that yourself. I forgot.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just let me know, because I'm going to do this in slideshow format. So let me know when you can see the screen.
We can, yeah.
Okay, great.